Okay, we're back. Need to move through this. I think I was just talking too much the first time. Great. So, John Calhoun, political leader, 1844. 1844, before we even look at the thing, before we even look at the questions, what are we thinking about? Pre-Civil War, but after the Missouri Compromise, so we're in that kind of tumultuous state of conflict between the North and the South. Also, hopefully, if you were to remember that John Calhoun was from South Carolina, then that's going to make everything a lot easier too, because you're immediately going to see his name and be like, boop, he was definitely pro-slave. So, which of the following groups would have been most likely to support Calhoun's views? Just like I just said, he supported slavery, so even if you didn't read this and you knew John Calhoun, you know it's going to be C. 36. Which of the following most directly undermines Calhoun's assertion? So, if we go back to the thing, right, it's talking about how the Negro race attains, well, I chose the wrong thing. It's talking about how the Negroes as slaves have a very good life. So you're trying to see what would refute it, what would undermine it, what would make this inaccurate. So the thing that makes the most sense is that they definitely were engaged in forms of resistance to slavery. So clearly it wasn't all that great. B, 37, 1840s, 1850s. Most directly contributed, well, again, like I just said, if we see that it's 1844, we know that this is during the divisive time where we were having these sectional divisions. B. Okay. 38, we see that we are reading something from a guy named John Smith, an English adventurer. Do you think one of us will ever be described in a history textbook as an adventurer? That's like such a funny thing to me. But that's a fun term. 1616. Great. So this is real early, going back to the colonial times. So the excerpt suggests that that promoters such as Smith most typically presented migration as a means for, so we look back, we see language like this will apparel their fatherless children of 13 or 14 years of young married people that have small wealth to live on, that they will be able to live exceedingly well. So it's appealing to this idea of like achieving social mobility and economic opportunity. If we think about it, right? 1616, and we have a guy named John Smith. These are all going to be types of things that indentured servants were really attracted to. This idea of, oh, I'm not doing too hot over in Europe. I'm going to come over to America because I can work for a couple years, then get paid, get my own land. Psh, done deal. I'm not going to get out that much in Great Britain, so I'm going to pop on over here. So that off the bat seems like the best choice, and it is the best choice. Now, 39. The excerpt would most be most useful to historians as a source of information about which of the following. So, let's see. The interaction of English colonial settlers with native populations. No, nothing in there is about that. Move on. Harsh realities of life in the early 17th century American colonies, including illness, high mortality rates, and starvation. No, because we just said that this is describing how wonderful it is to come over and achieve social mobility and economic opportunity. So we're not going to tell you about all the bad stuff that's going to happen to you, that you inevitably will die before you actually reach that social mobility and economic opportunity. That's not exactly putting us in a good marketing position. So it's not B. And then C. Role that appeals and advertising played in encouraging men and women to participate in colonization efforts. That seems right. But let's just check D. Nature of master and apprentice relationships in England in the early 17th century. No, don't get fooled by that. You may see master and apprentice and are like, oh, are they talking about indentured servitude? But then make sure you're seeing that it's in England. So that's not relevant for this. We're talking about promoting coming to the U.S. It's C. 40. Which of the following was a major contrast between the New England colonies and the colonies of France? New England colonies were based on more diverse agriculture and commerce. The French settled more often in cities and towns. The French had more conflicts with American Indians. New England developed a less rigid racial hierarchy. So, to do this, we would have to think back, again, this is one of those things that's calling on a little bit more content knowledge than actual textual analysis knowledge. But if we think about New France, we think, okay, we talked about them right before the French-Indian War. We talked about how they were really just up in the north and in Canada, so they really weren't growing much, right? Because it was so cold. So they were doing a lot of the fur trading. They had a lot of good relationships with the Native Americans. So those are some things when we think of New France, off the bat, those are the things that stick out. So it definitely wouldn't be that they had more conflicts with the Native Americans. They actually had a much better relationship with them. So that's not it. New England developed a less rigid racial hierarchy. No, that's not it. And then the French settled more often in cities and towns. No, they were pretty much on Indian land. Remember, we had Lawrence, who came in and was founder of New France and lived as one among the Native American population. So definitely not cities and towns. But we also don't have any proof to back up that happened more so than New England. So the New England colonies, though, definitely had a more diverse agriculture and commerce, right? They were able to grow some stuff. They were trading with other folks. Theirs was definitely different than the colonies of France. So, 1865, the Report on the Condition of the South. 1865, we see that date immediately. What do we think? Year that the Civil War ended and that Reconstruction started. Yes, correct. Good job. So, we are thinking about all the things that now will have to happen now that the Civil War is over. So, his analysis most directly illustrated the debates about which of the following issues in the South. The best answer is C, the process of readmitting Confederate states. That was the biggest thing that happened after this war ended. We know for sure that the issuing of the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation, happened in 1863. Not relevant. Get on out of here. They're trying to test you to see if you know what date it is and what's happening. The extent of federal legislative power, no. The biggest thing is that it's readmitting the Confederate states and trying to figure out how this new unified nation will look. So 42, attitudes of white Southerners described by Schurz contributed to which of the following developments in the last quarter of the 19th century? Let's practice that. Last quarter of the 19th century. We know that 19th century is the 1800s. Quarters, 25, or, well, I guess in 25 increments. So 1825 would be the first quarter, 1850 would be the half or the second quarter, third quarter would be 75, and fourth quarter would be 1900, right? So in the last quarter, they're asking then 1875 onward. So we know that formal Reconstruction ends in 77, so we're thinking then they're probably talking about Jim Crow era stuff. So we look at this, the sale of most plantations to African Americans to keep them in the South. Well, that would have been nice, but that didn't happen. The establishment of sharecropping throughout the South, that definitely happened and definitely was part of Jim Crow era South, so that's feeling good. Nullification crisis, that happened even before, that happened in Jackson's time, back even before the Civil War, so nope. And the rise of the Whig Party in the South, get out of here. It's clear that it's sharecropping. B. 43, efforts by Republicans such as Schurz to establish a base for their party in the South after the Civil War ultimately failed because the Republicans did grow weary of pressing their Reconstruction agenda in a hostile environment. So we can think about how there was still so much tension. So having the Republicans try to make a party, trying to get people to vote for them, especially when you were still trying to get African Americans to vote, it was too much. So they could not have a true base because there was still so much building and rebuilding to do. Okay. Now this, Franklin Roosevelt, quarantine speech. You just had this, I'm like 95% sure. I just put this on your test a couple weeks ago. So the ideas expressed in the excerpt differed from the prevailing United States approach to foreign policy issues, primarily in that Roosevelt was arguing to expand the role of the United States in the world. We had just gotten back from a very isolationist view, right, after World War I. So he's trying to convince us that actually we should be expanding our role. We have a lot to offer, and we should make sure that we are getting involved and that we are expanding and being a participant in this. So we know that, like, right now, we're not trying to be an international police power. We're just trying to care about World War II. We're not doing Latin America. That was pre-World War I. Encouraging the United States to avoid a political entanglement. No, he's trying to get us in there. We're already helping them a little bit. He's worried about what's to come. We're doing that. The excerpt best reflects an effort by Roosevelt to, indeed, overcome opposition, right? That was our prevailing thought, this idea of, hey, we should actually do this, even though you all don't think we should. So use the test to help you. And also time-wise, right? 1937, by 41 we're in there, but we needed a lot of convincing to do that first. Which of the following best represents continuity? Continuity keeps on continuing in the years after 1945, so after the war has ended. What represents this idea? And that's going to be this idea that we should be involved, right? So this whole passage is about us being involved in international affairs. Then B, United States membership in an international collective security organization, because it's for our best interests, is going to be what fits best. You definitely just saw this poster. Wartime mobilization. We're trying to get women involved, see how they have a role in all this. The poster was intended to convince women that they had that essential role, like we just said, that wartime mobilization of society, specifically society's women. And then which of the following represents a later example of that change? So if we're saying, hey, you have a role here, we need you, you are important to our economy and to our society, then the best answer here is going to be these feminist calls for equal economic opportunities in the 1970s. You're saying, hey, we're here, we can take on men's roles, we deserve this, we are needed in these roles, then, hey, by the 1970s, you should be paying us and putting us into equal economic opportunities. So we're no longer in women's roles, we're just in straight up job roles. So, Bill Clinton, did anyone freak out when they saw this? Because they were like, oh no, we didn't talk about Bill Clinton. You're right, we didn't. So let's figure out how we can embrace this question. The era of big government is over, but we can't go back to a time when our citizens were just left to fend for themselves. We will meet them by going forward as one America, by working together in our communities, our schools, our churches and synagogues, our workplaces across the entire spectrum of our civic life. So which of the following actions by the Clinton administration best reflects the ideas about the scope of government expressed in this expert? So they are talking about, shoot, we are running out of time. Luckily, the last part you have already seen before, but they're talking about how we can no longer go back to big government of like the New Deal, right? Because then we had the New Deal, and then we went into all through the Cold War where we're getting a little bit more conservative and a little bit more wary of big government. And then we get into Reagan, who was like, hey, if we give more money to the wealthy people, it'll all just like trickle down to the poor. And clearly that didn't work. But Clinton was definitely up against an environment that did not want a big government. We were much more conservative. But he still had a pretty progressive approach to things. So we needed to protect our citizens, right? So we're thinking, okay, if we want our citizens to all be together and to help them and support them, we're thinking definitely along the lines of New Deal in terms of like social welfare stuff. So let's see. Pursue military strategies? No, that has nothing to do with what he was just talking about. The enactment of welfare reform to restrict benefits and encourage self-reliance. Yeah, so it is a focus on welfare reform, but it does address these ideas of concern about big government and like helping people too much. And so I actually did a lot of work with this in my old job, but like the whole reason that TANF is such a mess is temporary assistance for needy families is actually because of this, and welfare reform happened under the Clinton administration. And the other stuff doesn't make sense. There was an effort to enact universal health care legislation, but that would have been really embracing big government and also did not work. So the enactment, though, of welfare reform with these heavy stipulations did indeed happen during the Clinton administration and makes the most sense. So the ideas expressed by Clinton were most similar to which president? It wasn't FDR, because he put a lot of restrictions on welfare reform that made it seem made it very difficult for people to actually get what they deserved and get the help that they needed. So it's not FDR who made that quite easy. Same thing with Lyndon Johnson. If anything, he did reflect more of his Republican predecessor, not immediate predecessor, but former Republican president who tried to find a way to be socially conscious, quote unquote, while also being very conservative. So it would be B. Now, for these, I'm going to not run through these because we're about to run out of time, but you can ask me about them tomorrow. We've read excerpts from Harriet Hanson Robinson. It's Life of the Early Mill Girls, The Factory, The Lowell System. I'm pretty confident that you guys should have gotten these already, and we've seen questions like these a couple different times. So those were the last 5, and now you did it. Check yourself. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.